To its next speaker. With over 16 years of experience in FedRAMP and the federal space, our next speaker is the founder, Chief Technology Samurai of BladeStack.io, a bootstrapped cybersecurity firm specializing in FedRAMP advisory. Please welcome to the stage Bhanu Jagasia.
Thank you, Travis. All right, so I'm gonna give everybody a couple of minutes or a second to run away because I'm gonna be talking about FedRAMP. I'm gonna start with, so first of all, that's me. So BladeStack, as Travis mentioned, we are a FedRAMP advisory firm, and that's all really I'm going to say right now because typically when people see FedRAMP or hear FedRAMP, they either go running away or they stick around and groan. So that's, again, just a little bit about me. And what we're going to be going through is the story of how we kind of came about with Teleport, how we learned about Teleport, and how we eventually started using Teleport. So that's just a little about the company. I'm not going to go and bore you with the details going forward. So Kiefer. Kiefer is responsible for implementation for one of our service offerings called bladeRAMP. And essentially what bladeRAMP is, it's a tech stack that we deploy in Boundary for our customers that are looking to go through FedRAMP, or I guess that's the best way of putting it, to meet FedRAMP requirements. Now, raise of hands for folks that have actually dealt with the FedRAMP PMO. Okay, so we got a couple of folks here. So the best of the FedRAMP PMO, again, great folks to people, but it can be interesting, is that Darth Vader meme where the Darth Vader says, "I've altered the deal, pray I don't alter it further." That's only because guidance typically changes. So one of our CSPs, which were going through the FedRAMP process, what essentially happened was the initial implementation, which was to get into the boundary. The FedRAMP boundary is a major thing, it's a very important thing as part of the actual FedRAMP authorization, which is how do you access your systems? How do you actually authenticate to your systems? How you actually get authorized to your system? Do you have single sign-on? So on and so forth. Initially, a very generally accepted method of authenticating to your boundary was going through the VPN, and actually, once you're on the VPN, even though if that VPN space was segmented to your FedRAMP boundary or your FedRAMP space, you were fine initially. So in terms, fine as in it was accepted by the FedRAMP PMO, and that was generally the recommendation the FedRAMP PMO would provide. It's saying, hey, get on a VPN, make sure that VPN is part of your actual FedRAMP boundary, you authenticate to the VPN, you access your resources, you're good to go. So circling back around a couple of months ago, guidance has changed, and FedRAMP PMO published a white paper, subnetting, but within that actual white paper talked about, hey, how do you actually authenticate to your resources? How do you actually get onto your resources? And how do you actually access your resources, probably the best way of saying it. And one of the things that came about was some of the compliance conundrums, as we like to say. So one of the things in that white paper that came out was the first hop and the first compute hop. And separate subnets, that was already a given. You know, need to make sure we have separate subnets for public and private. But the two sticking points was the first hop and the first compute. What essentially the guidance changed to was, hey, once you actually authenticate and get to your FedRAMP authorization boundary, having a VPN is not sufficient enough. What you actually need to make sure you do is get onto a first compute instance. Now, the first compute did not load balancers, proxies, or any type of VPN or appliance did not apply. Meaning, okay, well, what are our options? Do we have to go through a Bastion host? Do we have to go through some sort of a different type of proxy? And so essentially for our customer, that became a very big challenge in terms of they didn't want to do a Bastion host because for Bastion host, we would need to ensure we have licensing and you need to tie up Active Directory for users and so on and so forth. So going on to the next one is more issues. And I believe I just spoke about this, but VPN no more, meaning we didn't want to use the VPN and the customer didn't want to use the VPN, and neither did we want to use Bastion hosts, and neither did we want to use a VDI. And we did not want to get into more licensing issues. Again, so we were looking for a solution, and I was actually speaking to some folks during lunch around, how we actually came about Teleport. It was a kind of a mix of things. First was we kind of Googled and looked for remote access mechanisms, and I believe a speaker previously was talking about, I think it was Eve, yeah, the CEO, talking about that people were examining Teleport and were actually breaking apart the code and going through examination, and people were talking about Teleport. And the second piece was Chris Martell, my partner, was actually at RSA and then met with some of the Teleport folks at RSA at the same time. And then the third was Kiefer, who I introduced. We were interviewing at that time, and I think it was literally a week of conversations when all these things started to come together. And one of our employees as well, Matt, was talking about Teleport. And we actually just kind of came together and said, hey, let's check this actual tool out. So I believe next is enter Teleport. So buy Bastion and directory services and meeting the first compute and infrastructure costs. So we look into Teleport and we identified that, okay, well, technically, we don't need a standard Bastion host. Neither do we need directory services, even though our customer had directory services, because typically you will need some sort of directory services. But first compute was actually the biggest piece, along with infra cost and licensing overhead, because one of the biggest challenges was just implementation of a Bastion host would require, okay, do we want a Windows server? What type of server do we want? What type of licensing do we need to do? That's more administrative overhead that we need to implement. And essentially, most CSPs typically don't want Windows in their environment. Nothing against Windows. So again, Bastion. So on top of that was, well, you still need to do hardening. You still need to have some GUI-based access, and you potentially need Active Directory. So for the Bastion host, again, Teleport helped us kind of not worry about a lot of these things in terms of having the Active Directory, having the Bastion host. And a lot of us, we had to do some solutioning on our side because our service offering, bladeRAMP, we were considering replacing our current implementation of our VPN and a optional Bastion host with Teleport, which would save us costs from an infrastructure cost standpoint and licensing overhead standpoint. And that wasn't just a win for that wouldn't just be a win for us, but that would actually be a win for our customer because we would be falling within their authorization boundary. So next, authentication simplified. I talked a little bit about this, but it helped. I don't want to regurgitate literally what's on the slide, but it's authentication was simplified. And I believe I go to our next one where we talk about, sleek application access. So one of the things that really caught at least my eye for Teleport was how the access actually occurred, meaning the authentication, the access to your applications was very sleek, very streamlined, very easily implemented, and Kiefer, our main engineer, also was very, very fond of it, and we were all very fond of it. So we did a POC, we looked at how it works, and as part of our authorization boundary and our tech stack for bladeRAMP, we also have Burp Suite to do the scanning that we need to do for a vulnerability and web application, and that's probably the best way of saying it again. So moving forward, the license to save with FedRAMP, there were some instances, there's some nuances there. So I'm going to try to provide the Cliff Notes version of it, but essentially, if you are, in this scenario, we would be a managed service provider, we as in bladestack.io, and bladeRAMP as our service offering, because we would be planning on implementing or providing teleport as part of our service offering, which would go within the boundary of the customer, and the customer is responsible for the authorization boundary, but we are just happen to be a managed service as part of their systems. What that means from a FedRAMP standpoint per the latest guidance is, if you're providing any sort of licensing, that licensing needs to be acquired by the CSP and then downstream to you. So if you are doing managed services on the behalf of a customer and you're within the authorization boundary, and even though you're bringing the tool stack, the CSP needs to be acquiring the licensing, or it sounds weird, but you would be an external system within the authorization boundary per the latest guidance. So teleport would help with that as well, and we wouldn't have to manage the actual licensing overhead. And then I have a couple of points here in terms of just overall licensing, especially when you're working with Windows servers. And basically, throughout our entire POC, licensing was one of the biggest sticking points. And I don't have any metrics here, but there was substantial savings from just implementation of wiping out any sort of VPN, wiping out any sort of Bastion host, Windows server, or any sort of mechanism which would effectively act as a Bastion host. So the other piece was Kiefer, again, super smart guy, and we're all about automation at BladeStack as well. Terraform. The integration between Terraform and Teleport was super, super sleek, and just the fact that we have Teleport has the Terraform providers, or Terraform has the Teleport provider, we were able to not only implement and deploy our infrastructure much more streamlined, but because pretty much everybody stamps out the infrastructure via Terraform, very, very useful tool set. And essentially, as part of our proof of concept, we were able to really deploy our bladeRAMP service offering in dev, stage, prod, to really test out the actual automation capabilities of Teleport. So another big sticking point was FIPS. The fact that Teleport Enterprise uses FIPS and actually uses a FIPS validated cryptographic module as opposed to a FIPS compliant cryptographic module. There is a big difference between those two things, and those will most likely get you a risk if you're going through the FedRAMP process for using a FIPS compliant versus a FIPS validated. A lot of folks get those two pieces confused. And the other fact that is typically, to demonstrate FIPS validated compliance or FIPS compliance overall, you need to be running in FIPS mode, and thankfully Teleport has FIPS mode. It already has a command to be able to operate and display that your actual implementation of Teleport is running in FIPS mode. So we were able to automate that as well. So as part of continuous monitoring, we're able to generate that, hey, yes, Teleport is running in FIPS mode. So this is a overall high-level architecture of how we implement it, pretty straightforward. But overall, going into the next steps was, honestly, the fact that the maturity side of Teleport from a continuous monitoring standpoint was a big sticking point for us. The fact is, as part of FedRAMP, going through FedRAMP is a very big challenge, sure. But now maintaining FedRAMP and actually maintaining the actual infrastructure and implementation of doing everything what your documentation says you're doing, that's one of the biggest challenges of FedRAMP or DoD IL4 or 6 or what have you. With Teleport, we were able to better manage our access control to our systems and services. And I believe Ev said it as well. SSO helps solve a lot of the pieces. But one of the biggest challenges still is the authorization engine. Because you have all of these multitude of various systems which have different policy engines, which how they evaluate the access and the roles to the applications that you have within your environment. That's still an issue. That still needs problem solving, but Teleport definitely helps us bridge, I don't want to say bridge a gap, but get us closer to the end goal of much more, what's that word I'm looking for? Streamlined access, or that's probably not the best word for it, but overall really helped us with our continuous monitoring piece. And I believe that's it. Thank you.
All right, any questions?
Any questions? All right.
Say go.
You mentioned about the FedRAMP, and would be interesting to learn or hear your thoughts also about SOC 2 and PCI in comparison.
Yeah, so is the question, how does FedRAMP compare to SOC 2 and PCI?
Yeah, in terms of, is it really different in terms of, or it's just that?
It's very, yeah, so
what do you think?
It's very different. So the way we typically answer that, because we have a lot of folks asking us about what's, hey, I have my SOC 2, I have my this report, maybe a drop in the water. Like,
Wow,
yeah,
okay.
So FedRAMP is a very high bar, and there's a lot of requirements, and then they have, obviously, the entire body of the federal government and the program office working towards always improving the program. But yeah, it's a big...
It's not helping that much if you have...
Yeah, no, it doesn't help that much, yeah. I mean, it helps. Obviously, you have something there, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done before you even get close to FedRAMP from SOC or PCI.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Nope. Okay. Oh, Reed. Navigate this maze here. There we go.
Are there any specific teleport features or anything that you would like to see to improve teleport's own support for FIPS or FedRAMP in general?
So I will say a lot of our customers are looking to move away from managing. So even though they don't manage the infrastructure, they would like for They don't even want to have managed services. So a lot of customers would prefer like the cloud version of Teleport to be FedRAMP authorized. That's probably the one big sticking point. So the alternative right now is implementation of Teleport Enterprise within the boundary, which we manage, which doesn't constitute as an external service at that point. So to answer your question, I guess get FedRAMP authorized for the Teleport Cloud version.
That's what I figured. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, another round of applause for Bhanu. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
We'll take just a few moments here to swap mics, and we'll be right back with you.